Hello, everybody. My name is Dawei, and for this presentation, I'll be talking about scientific eugenics. I know by now you're being a little confused. You're like, what is he talking about? Well, eugenics basically is the belief and practice to improve the genes of the human population. And how do they do that? They do so by eliminating undesirable traits. This eugenics was a term that was coined during the 18th century. The 18th century is also known as the Age of Reason. In another way of saying it, it is also called the Enlightenment period. Okay, now you're like, so how does this whole eugenics and the Age of Reason all come together? Well, let's start with a few basics. The Age of Reason, basically, is a period of time in the 18th century. So the 18th century would be around 1800 to 1900. It's not specifically there, but it's generally around that time. This is a period of time where people no longer believed in religion. They don't no longer blindly just listen to whatever religious text, whatever the Bible said. Instead, they began to use science to understand things such as the earth, the universe, humans, animals, and more. This is a period of time that was really popular in Europe. The Age of Reasons was popular in Europe, and it created intellectual and philosophical movements. So by now you might think the Age of Reason is great, right? It sounds great because we have great philosophers during this period of time that created a lot of great thoughts about how to create a society, a democratic society. We have John Locke, who talked about how the government's power should be limited, how people have natural rights and all that. And we have other philosophers like Jean Rousseau, who talked about how people need to have social contract with the government and there should be laws and there should be rights that are enforced. Without the Age of Reason, we wouldn't come to today. We have America, one of the greatest democracy countries in the world. In addition to that, the Age of Reason also came up with a lot of findings like biology, physics, medicine, philosophy, and chemistry. So, the Age of Reason, this Enlightenment period in the 18th century, created modern science. Just imagine how much scientific findings and discoveries today that we're able to cure diseases and infections and know more about the human body. Um, During the Age of Reason, universities were also created, encyclopedias and dictionaries. There's also the scientific method. The scientific method is basically, for example, when I say the sky is blue, I don't just say the sky is blue. I have to support my statement, right? By doing so, I can observe the sky, observe, and from my observations or experiments, I can say, yes, the sky is blue. So basically, this whole medicine science thing became the foundation of understanding people, the society, and the universe during this period of time. Astronomy also became popular. We learned about the Earth, we learned about stars, the placement of the stars, the planets, their relationships to it. The Age of Reason also created the most foundational biological science that we know today, like Newton's nucleus, the proton, the neutron, the electrons, the atoms. So, it sounds like the Age of Reason is all good, right? Well, there's also the bad. The Age of Reason also created two things: racism and eugenics. One big example is the Holocaust. This is an example of eugenics. It's also racism towards the Jews. They were all gathered up because they were physically different. They looked different, and they were measured by their skulls and their nose lengths. And guess what? They were all gathered up into concentration camps, into gas chambers, and millions of Jews have died because of eugenics in the World War II. We also have slavery. America has a long history with slavery. A lot of Africans were illegally transported to the United States, and they were basically considered less than human. They worked all day long with white owners. And we also have colonialism. Colonialism is basically the action where Europeans and Americans expanded outside of their country. They could do so by killing the people who live there, the local people. They could force them to leave their homeland, force them to learn the American language, the American education, the American way of life. So that's colonialism. Even till today, we have so many problems that came from the age of reason, specifically with the eugenics and racism. We have police brutality that is still a major issue, a social issue actually, in America. There's the issue of police profiling and the likelihood of black people being shot to death simply because they look suspicious and they look dangerous to the police. So that basically concludes the good and mostly the bad, the eugenics or racism, which came out of the age of reason. So, how does this relate to science? Well, it is during the age of reason that philosophers and scientists began to basically categorize people based on their skin color, their cranial size, the color of their eyes and hair, the facial types. So basically, using science, they basically divided into people based on their races, their skin color. And it was also during this time the survival of the fittest became apparent, where it's the belief that those who are unfit should be eliminated. So let me introduce some people during the age of reason, philosophers and scientists that really categorized people based on, their physical appearance, skin color. There's Blumenbach. He basically measured human skulls and physical characteristics and divided people into 5 races: the Caucasians, the Mongolians, the Ethiopians, Americans, and Malaysian. These are just examples of how there's different skull sizes, and this is how they basically categorize people. There's also Arthur. He believed that the right race was superior to others. He was also the one who categorized race into 3 colors: black, white, yellow. We always hear that today. We talk about black people, we talk about white people, we talk about Asian people as yellow people, yellow-skinned. There's also Carl Linnaeus. He basically created descriptions for each type of race. So for the native indigenous, which is the Amorite, I had to also Google that word. They're contented and free. Europeans are active, clever, inventive. East Asians, Asians in general, are ruled by opinion. They're haughty, they're desirous. Africans, they're crafty, slow, and foolish. So let me just take out the European and the African descriptions here. You can see that describing Europeans using very positive words such as clever, inventive, but with Africans, he used slow, foolish. In actuality, a lot of philosophers and scientists during the Age of Reason had these beliefs that whites were superior to other colors. This is Kant. Kant is a great philosopher during the Age of Reason, but he was also racist. He came up with the statement, because he described blacks, because he is so amply supplied by his motherland, he is lazy, indolent, and dawdling. So what you can see here, a lot of negative words to describe the black race. Let me move over to Charles Darwin. Darwin is a man who basically, he went out to nature, he observed how certain birds with certain peaks were able to survive in the wild, while other birds with certain peaks were not able to. So he basically discovered that some genetic expressions adapt better to the environment, while other genetic expressions will die off. This is Francis Galton. He's basically the dude who came up with eugenics, the word. And guess what? He's Darwin's cousin. And he came up with this belief that people who are unfit should not procreate. They should be killed, just like, the Holocaust, the Jews. But how do we describe unfit? Generally speaking, we're talking about the mentally disabled, the intellectually disabled, or the physically disabled. And what they do to them is basically compulsory sterilization. Compulsory sterilization is basically forcing them surgically to avoid these people who are considered mentally ill to procreate, because they are burdens on the rest of society. And guess what this leads to? A lot of rights movements that are still going on today, even with disability people. In America, we have the 14th Amendment, which basically states that everybody, any person, should have equal protection of the law. But is that really happening today? Not really. Let's go back to the 1920s, a Supreme Court case. The Buck v. Bell case basically legalized forced sterilization and caused over 700 70,000, sorry, Americans to be sterilized because they were considered mentally disabled. Basically, this is a way to breed out bad traits. There's also an Indiana law that prevents the mentally disabled from procreating if criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists are included. So, with that, what can we do today? We can really just focus on the idea of self determination and self pro choice. If I want to procreate, I will procreate, regardless of if I'm disabled or not. Even more, DNA has shown that humans between humans, there's 99.9% of the same DNA, regardless of our skin colors. So, we're actually all the same, right? Let me take Dalai Lama's quote. We may be different races and religions, but we are all part of the same human family. So what I hope you can take away from this is the the thought of Age of Reason did bring great things. It brought great discoveries to the human world, but also it brought something that was bad: racism, eugenics, discrimination, prejudice. So now that we know these, what we can do today is go forward, take the good from the Age of Reason, and now try to combat what's going on with the social problems all over the world. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you have learned something very significant from this that you can take away and perhaps, talk to other people and have very debatable discussions about this. Thank you very much.